So Phil is around again with his KTM 2017 300EXC, and in this video we're going to be showing how to repair the starter system. So Phil's bike has done 145 hours now, and about 4 rides ago it started having starter issues, and right now you try it 10 times, probably 8 or 9 times it won't start, so it's got pretty bad. So in the last video we showed the damage to the ignition cover, specifically to the area where the bush sits. It was split, so we went ahead and got a new ignition cover, and we've got a new gasket, a new Bendix, and we've also got some bronze bushes made by XRC. I'm actually going to start selling these bushes on the Tokyo Off-Road website. If you're interested in those, I'll put a link in the description of the video. This video we're going to be repairing the bike, and we've actually got it leaning over on a stand. It's a little bit easier to work on when it's leaning over. You have better access. The starter system is behind the ignition cover. So you can leave the gear shifter on, but it's a little bit easier if you take it off. So I'm going to take it off and make a note of what position the shift lever is in before you take it off, so you can put it back in the same position. Then the next step is to remove the ignition cover, and it's held on with these bolts around here. There are several different lengths, so what I like to do is make a template out of some cardboard, and then when I take the bolts out I just put them in the template, and it makes it very easy when you go to put the bolts back in. There's no chance of mixing up the different lengths. On the other side, on a clutch cover, if you do mess up the bolt lengths and put the wrong one in the wrong place, one of them, if you put a bolt in too long, it will lock the starter motor and stop it turning over. So it's pretty important that you do put the bolts in the right order, and making the template can save a lot of time. So with covers like this, I always loosen them off gradually, just work round, and you can find if you just loosen one area, there is a possibility it can distort the cover or case. So once you've got it loose, you can start removing the bolts. Right, once you've removed all of the cover bolts, you can carefully lift off the cover. We have a spare gasket. If you don't have a gasket, if you do this step carefully, you can reuse the gasket. The gasket purpose is not really to hold any oil in, because there shouldn't really be much oil in there. It's more to keep water and dirt out of the ignition system. So as I say, if you're careful, you can reuse the gasket. With the ignition cover off, you can see the different parts of the starter system and the ignition as well. This is a flywheel, and here's the starter, and this is the balancer for the engine, and this is the Bendix of the starter, and the starter motor is here. So the parts we're going to need to replace are the ignition cover, so we need to remove the starter, the Bendix, which just comes out, and the bushings for the Bendix. So there's one in the cover. The KTM cover already has a bush fitted, but we're going to replace that with an XRC bronze bush, and also the bush in the case we're going to replace with an XRC bronze bush. So the starter is held onto the ignition cover with these 2 bolts, so you have to remove these and then it just lifts off. And you can see here the ignition cover is badly damaged. It's kind of oval shaped and cracked and split inside. But this allows the Bendix to move away from the flywheel so it doesn't engage properly. So the first thing we need to do with the new case is remove the stock bush. We're going to be using some bronze bushes which are a lot less prone to wear. And to remove the bush, there's a couple of different methods you could use. One is to use a drill, so an 8.5mm diameter drill is recommended, and just drill into it and it should come out fairly easily. It'll start spinning the bush. If the 8.5 doesn't work, you can work up, so use a 9 and then 9.5. The bore is 10mm, so you should be careful you don't go larger than that. The method I'm going to use is I'm going to use a blind bearing puller to pull the bearing out, and this method is a little bit safer. Also, you can, if you need to replace the bronze bushes at some point, which is probably unlikely. I'm suspecting they'll probably last the lifetime of the bike. But if you do need to remove the bronze bush, a blind bearing puller is probably the best method to use. Okay, so this is the blind bearing puller tool I have. This is an 8mm one, and you simply insert it into the bush, and then this part goes inside and will splay apart this part of the tool. And to remove it, there's two methods. One is to use this type of tool, and you place it inside and then tighten it down and it pulls it out slowly. That's a very safe but slow method. But I'm going to use a slide hammer. These bushes are tiny and it should come out very easily. If you support the cover, it should pop straight out. So I'm going to try doing that. So I've just pushed it in there and then tighten this down. And then I'm going to tighten it a little bit. It doesn't need to be super tight. And then attach the slide hammer. And then it should pop straight out. And it's out. And we're also going to replace the Bendix case-side bush with a bronze bush, so we need to remove this. We're going to use the same method using a blind bearing puller tool with a slide hammer. And that came out very easily as well. So now I have both of the Bendix bushes out. You can see them on the left, and comparing to a new one, you can see how much they've worn. So the new one has a red coating on the inside to reduce friction, and that's completely worn away. And the metal surface of the bush is worn as well. You can easily see how much thinner they are. Also, the construction of the bush really isn't very good quality. I think you can see there's a slit, and the way it's made is just in a press. They press it into the shape of the bush. And to demonstrate how badly the bush is worn, I've got the original bush here on the shaft of the Bendix, and you can see how badly it's worn. There's a lot of play there. Previously, I assumed they had aluminium. The new one kind of has an aluminium color to it, but they're actually steel. So this is a magnet, and it's attracted to that. Compared to the XRC bronze bushings, which you can see here, these are machined out of a solid piece of bronze and much higher quality. And two kits are available. For the 17 plus KTMs, you only need 2 bushes, so the kit includes the 2 bushes plus the installation tool. And for older models up to 16, including the Freeride 250 2-stroke, you require 4 bushes. So that kit has 4 bushes and the installation tool. Okay, so now we're getting ready to install the bronze bush into the ignition cover. And a couple of things to note. So this cover is brand new, so it's very clean. There's no debris. But if you're using a used cover, you definitely want to clean this area very thoroughly. And also inspect where the bush fits in, make sure it's not damaged at all. And also you do a test fit. So if the bush slides straight in without any pressure at all, it's not going to last very long. So you'll need to use some retention compound. Loctite make one which is a 648, so I have some here. I've used this in the past and it works very well. And just apply some to the outer surface of the bush and position it, and then you definitely want to leave it overnight, preferably about 24 hours to set thoroughly, and then I'd install the Bendix after that. Another thing to note is the XRC bushes have a flat machined into them and a small slot. This is intended so that oil collects here and then drains into the inner part of the bush, and it's recommended that this flat is positioned at the top of the Bendix shaft. So when you press it into the cover and the case, you want to make sure this flat is up. Okay, so I'm ready to install the bush now. The cover, this is the bottom part of the cover, so this is the top this way. So taking note of where the flat is on the bush and pointing that upwards, position the bush into the hole in the cover, and then using the supplied tool, keeping it parallel, just gently tap the bush in. Until it's flush with the cover. Okay, so we've cleaned up the case where the Bendix bush fits, and we did a test fit. Unfortunately, it looks like the case is worn slightly, so I can just easily press the bush into the case, as you can see there. Luckily, there doesn't appear to be a lot of play, so it's just a question of holding it in place. And I'm going to use some Loctite 648, which I showed you before, and allow that to go off. So I looked it up, and the cure time is to reach full strength is 24 hours. So I'm going to install the bush now and leave it for 24 hours and then finish the installation. Okay, so I've applied some Loctite 648 to the outside of the bush carefully, and I'm going to position the flat of the bush pointing up and place it into the case. And here you can see the bush installed. You've got the flat here, and everything looks good. There's no excess Loctite around. If there is, carefully wipe it off. Be sure to not get any Loctite on the inside surface of the bush. So I'm going to leave this for 24 hours and then finish assembly. Okay, so I've waited 24 hours and the bush retaining compound has reached full strength now. So I'm going to reassemble the starter system. Regarding lubrication, in the factory, grease is used on all of the gears and splines. The problem with that is it flings off pretty easily, and once it's been flung off, it doesn't provide much lubrication. I'm going to be using some lightweight oil. XRC actually recommends a Motorex 2000 spray, which I couldn't find locally. So I'm going to order some, but I didn't have it in time for this video. So I'm going to apply some oil to the bush here, the spline on a starter motor, and the flywheel. And the oil you use, you want to make sure that it doesn't gum up after application. For instance, a chain lube, which gets tacky, you don't want to use that type of lubrication at all. One thing you should be aware of is the Bendix. When it's in operation, it opens up like this, and because other parts are spinning round, if you're using a heavy grease or a tacky oil, it can make its way into the Bendix and then start gumming that up, and then you'll find that it doesn't spin out quick enough and doesn't engage. So I think it's much better using a lightweight oil and then to maintain it regularly. So I'm going to lube up the Bendix as well, and the gears here. and these gears. And to install the Bendix, it's a bit of a tight fit, but I found it is possible with the starter motor in place. You just have to wriggle things around and line things up carefully. Okay, so that's the Bendix in place. And now I'm ready to reinstall the starter into the ignition cover. And one thing you should note is the starter on this, one of the coils is black colored, and it's like this from brand new, so it hasn't gone bad or anything. And I've applied some Loctite 243 to the bolts, just make sure they don't come loose. And then don't forget to put this clip in, which holds the wiring down against the cover. There can be an issue if the wiring sticks up too far. It can rub on the flywheel and actually wear through the wiring. The one on Phil's bike looks as though it's touched a little bit, but it's not too bad. On my one, I actually used some epoxy and clamped it down to hold it in place. So that's one mod you can think about performing if you do have an issue there. Okay, so we're using a new gasket. There's two dowels, one here and one here, which the gasket needs to locate on. And then I'm going to apply some oil to the bush for the Bendix in the ignition cover as well. And then I'm ready to install this. And make sure everything lines up correctly and it's sitting flush with the engine case. If it's not, then you probably haven't got it seated on the Bendix correctly. And take it off, have a look at everything and try again. Okay, now I'm ready to install the cover bolts, and because I've got my template, it's very easy. Make sure you line the template up with the cover, and then you can take the bolts out and insert them into the cover. And when you're doing up the bolts, you should do it in a crisscross pattern to make sure it doesn't distort the cover. And I've gone around and tightened all of the cover bolts loosely, and now I'm going to torque them to 10 Newton meters. And the last thing to do is install the shift lever so that there's teeth on it, so it only goes in certain positions, and the adjustment is fairly coarse, so it's usually pretty obvious where it was. So it was right there. And make sure you use some Loctite 243 on the bolt, and it needs to be torqued to 14 Newton meters. Okay, so that's the repair complete. Now we just need to test it. Okay, let's see whether the starter works now. Yeah, it works really well. And I'll try it again. Perfect. Yeah, no hesitation at all. It engages straight away. How's the starter?
Starts perfect, yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Bit easier than kicking.
I don't know how we did without it 30 years ago.
Yeah, it wasn't easy on hills.
You just find yourself on these hills where you're facing down.
Yeah.
You can't start the bike.
Not easy. So a couple of takeaways from this repair experience. I would definitely recommend regular maintenance of the starter system. In the KTM manual, it does state you should inspect the starter every 40 hours, but it doesn't actually state what you should do. So I recommend take the ignition cover off and have a look at the Bendix and the bushes and make sure everything is in good shape. If the bushes are worn, definitely replace them straight away. And I would recommend replacing them with some XRC bronze bushes. which will probably last the lifetime of the bike with some lubrication. Also, you want to lube up all of the moving parts, the splines and gears and the bushes. And I would recommend using oil rather than grease, which flings off rather too easily. And finally, if you do experience any starter issues, I would definitely, even if it's not at a maintenance point, take it apart and have a look. And if you replace the bushes, for example, straight away, you might save yourself the cost of having to replace the ignition cover, as in this repair. So you can save yourself a lot of money.